Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Horror Detour, where I, if I can even speak, delve into a horror topic for us to discuss. Today, I'd like to ask you a question. Do you prefer fiction, or do you prefer what I would term true horror? I've touched upon this in some old videos before, but I thought I'd do an updated one. I'm often I'm often pulled in different directions with the channel and with some of the podcasts I do, because I do both podcasts and YouTube videos that are fiction based, and then I do ones that are based on alleged paranormal phenomena and true crime and that sort of stuff. But those experiences, my worry is that the experience for the listener or the viewer is that they might overlap. And unfortunately, sometimes someone might think that they are watching something that's based on a claimed paranormal experience or true crime, when really they're watching or listening to a piece of fiction. And vice versa, they might think that they're listening to fiction when they're actually listening to something that is based on a real event. That does bother me sometimes, even though I've played with the idea of presenting some stuff as if it's kind of real, but I'm trying to make it obvious that it's not. For me personally, I love legends and myths and stories about the paranormal, especially. Martin, who I host Talking to Dawn with, has kind of opened me up into the true crime sphere as well, and I enjoy these things. I find the true crime stuff to weigh down on me, like mentally a little bit. So if I cover a true crime case, I tend to want to step back from that for a little while, because it doesn't really do me good. There's plenty of people who can watch that sort of stuff, listen to that sort of stuff, read that sort of stuff, and it doesn't affect them. They're just curious and they're just learning about it. For me, it does affect me. Whereas most fictional horror, like, just thrills me, and I enjoy it. There is some fictional horror that is so hyper realistic that it's maybe not totally my cup of tea. I like there to be that sort of veneer of non-reality about things as well, so that I can feel at least some distance from what I'm watching, so I don't get too pulled in. I think that's why I love what I always term cozy horror, horror that makes you feel glad that you're inside on a rainy night, rather than horror that makes you just feel really disturbed. Although I still watch that stuff, I can't really help myself, but I watch it to a minimal level and read that sort of stuff to a minimal level, compared to the stuff that I prefer, that gives you a kind of sense of just like a chill, gives you an eerie feeling. And the feeling of the uncanny. That's what I enjoy the most. If I had to pick between reference or true horror and fiction, I'd probably go with fiction, to be honest, because I love those sorts of stories. But I do enjoy the factual stuff as well. It's just that I do worry sometimes that they'll bleed in to each other. And I wondered, how do you feel about that? Do you feel that they do overlap too much? If you've got a channel, for example, that does fiction stuff and factual stuff, do you feel like that's not really something that should be hosted in the same place? Because I certainly, a pet peeve of mine is when a film really goes out of its way, so out of its way, to say that it's based on true events, or these events are real, or that sort of thing. When and then you learn about it later on, you're like, it was very, very different. It was, this is not accurate at all in terms of what was even claimed. That that annoys me. Um, And I just think, like, make a documentary. If you're really wanting to do that sort of thing, make a documentary. But then some of my favourite films, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Blair Witch Project, etc., they play with that idea of realism. One of my greatest heroes is Orson Welles, and he famously did that with his War of the Worlds adaptation on radio. But there was a disclaimer, I believe, at the beginning of the radio show that most people missed. And I remember watching Ghost Watch, which was one of my all time favourite pieces of horror television, and it was presented as a real live broadcast on the BBC on Halloween about this television crew investigating this family who were supposedly being terrorised by a paranormal presence. And for an adult watching that, it becomes pretty obvious, probably quite quickly, that this is fiction. But as a kid watching it, it didn't feel that way at all. When you were seeing very strange things happening, it felt real at the time. And the only way that you knew that it wasn't was that there was a Screen One logo that popped up just before it started. So they didn't have any credits, but they had to have something coming up saying Screen One, which was like a brand on BBC that showed that it was a dramatisation, essentially. And there was terrible consequences of that, because I believe there was at least one, if not two, suicides from people who believed that what they were watching was real. That's why it's never been shown on television again. And for the longest time, you couldn't even get it on DVD. But I managed to get a copy eventually. But it's fantastic. But do you really need to blur that line so much that people who are perhaps vulnerable are going to be pulled so far into it? I suppose that then leads you into things like trigger warnings. And trigger warnings, I'm very conflicted about, because I understand why you would put up a trigger warning. We put up trigger warnings on Talking Till Dawn. I don't do it on the Ghastly Tales podcast for the fiction stuff. If something's particularly gruesome, I would maybe say it at the start of the podcast. And if people want to turn off or not listen to that, then that's absolutely fine, because I make that choice all the time. If someone tells me, especially if it's like a true crime thing, excuse me, and it's about like something that happened to kids, I can't do it. Especially since I became a dad, I just can't do it. It's too sad, it's too tragic. But in any case, what sort of horror do you prefer learning about and reading and watching? Do you prefer the true horror, or do you prefer the fiction stuff? And why do you feel that way? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. So I'll be back in another video. I don't know what's coming up next, because I've recorded these out of order. So it's a surprise to me just as much as it is to you. But I'll be back soon with more horror goodness. And until then, take care of yourselves. Let's go say it, and each other. Bye for now.